arrive in the United States on a tourist visa. And you got like a few grand in your pocket. And next thing you know, you're running this giant corporation. I mean, how did this happen?
Well, it wasn't next thing.
Well, it wasn't the next day, but...
It wasn't that simple. But, you know, I got here on a tourist visa, and the reason I got here is because, you know, I was in the high-tech world, and I felt that, you know, this is where it was happening. And when I got here, I started a little... Well, I first tried to find a job, you know, in different companies. But it turned out that all of them, including HP and another place where I applied, they said, well, you know, we really like what you do, and I had pretty good credentials because I had been involved with the Micral, which was the first ever PC, a bunch of stuff.
Well, that's the other amazing thing. You were involved with the very first PC.
Right.
And it was in Zurich. I mean,
actually, that was in Grenoble.
Oh, close enough. It was in Switzerland. I mean, no one thinks of
the
the PC being started in Switzerland.
But it's in a computer museum now.
Yeah,
and that's recognized now. It was, you know, 18 months before the Altair. But but here, let's just move back on to the arrival in the States. So anyway, after all this adventure, which, you know, I really didn't know what I was doing with that first ever PC. I was just like doing engineering, and that's all. And when I got here, that's what I wanted to do. So, you know, I went to try to work for HP or Apple or people. But those larger companies wouldn't hire me because they'd figure out after 2 or 3 days, they liked what I could do, but they figured that I didn't have a work visa. And, you know, large companies don't like to hire people without a green card.
Okay, because there's this interesting moment where it's like you come all the way from Europe to be in the center of the action, and you don't end up in Boston or in Palo Alto. You end up in Santa Cruz.
Right.
You know,
well,
you end up on the beach.
I went to Palo Alto, and then I went on a weekend at Santa Cruz and said, well, you know,
this is great.
This is much nicer, and for what I do, which is development for people, that works well. So I started this little consulting company called MIT Market and Time, and so Market and Time means, but MIT also meant, you know, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It was kind of a purposeful thing because I figured my customers were R&D types, were VP of engineering, and, you know, when they get a letter from MIT, they open it. So that's how I figured it out. It was my marketing of the time. You know, I knew nothing about marketing. That was the summer of '82 where I started that. But in around April '83, I got a letter from the real Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Cease and desist.
A bunch of lawyers who tell me, hey, you know, you can't use our name. And so I consulted a guy I had met who was a lawyer. He says, yeah, you're better off changing your name. And that's how, you know, the company that I started became Borland, which was kind of a made-up name for, you know, a change in name of Market and Time. So the first name of Borland, which is now called Emprise, was Market and Time.
It was MIT.
MIT, you know, who would know?
So when did your tourist visa run out in the midst of all
this? Well, so all this happened.
I should point out you're probably the most successful illegal alien Americans ever had.
Well, I'm legal.
You're legal now.
I'm a U.S. citizen now. But anyway, what happened is that I didn't pay attention to it. I started the business work, and for 4 or 5 years, I lived on this expired tourist visa, and never left the country, never went back anywhere, and just built the business until one day the Micral showed up.
So and the INS raided Borland looking for you?
I mean, we had lawyers talking, and I was about to be deported, and we made a deal, and it was very complex. It was a complex situation, and at the end of the day, I got my green card.
You know, only an entrepreneur would get so busy he forgets that he has to, like, become a citizen.
You really don't have time for that. I mean, that's a minor detail.
Oh, yeah. until you have your leg irons putting you on the plane.
Well, it almost happened. In fact, you know, the situation was that because, you know, I had done something wrong, like, you know, not get a proper visa, the punishment was that I had to go back to Paris to get my green card.
Oh, what a punishment.
And spend a week there, and I hadn't been out of the country.
See
back
the
to
family.
Paris where I grew up for 5 years, so it was an opportunity, but that was the punishment. And
well, let's talk about your childhood a little bit. Let's go back to Paris again for a moment. Your father was German, your mother French, is that correct? Tell me about them a little bit.
Well, they were really first generation French in the way that on my mom's side they were Russian Jews that had been chased out in 1905 during the pogroms, and they were cabinet makers. And instead of coming all the way to America like Fiddler on the Roof, they stopped in Paris and started making cabinets there. So and of course, you know, they didn't realize that, you know, they stopped in 1906 there. And of course, in 1939, Hitler got to them again, and so they stayed in France. And on my dad's side, they were engineers from generations, as I can remember, and they were German, you know, those kind of German integrated Jews who actually were part of Germany, actually fought on Germany's side in World War I. Then were really surprised to see that Hitler didn't like them anymore. And in the same way, well, they fled Germany, and my dad engaged in the French Foreign Legion to fight the Germans and did the war in actually in American uniform during D-Day and all that stuff. So after the war, basically they met, and my mom came from the French resistance side, and he came from having fought in many uniforms on the Allied side. And they met in Paris and lived in Paris.
During Liberation? It was like one of these romantic things
Absolutely.
they meet during Liberation?
It's a perfect story. Now, the story lasted that way. You know, I was born in '52, And it was a great story until 59 when they divorced. My dad was quite a ladies' man.
Nice, Santa Cruz. I'm seeing a connection here.
Oceans,
Yeah.
or water, maybe. But yeah, there may be a connection there. But I did finish there, and I also spent some time in Grenoble, and that's how I got in touch with the guys who were, the company was called R2E L2E, which is making this Micral. They were looking for guys to program the operating system and the tools and all that. And as a student, I took the job. I had no idea what I was doing, and it turned out to be the first such personal computer.
Well, how come? Maybe you can answer this. Maybe the trajectory of your career says something about it. Why didn't the personal computer industry, with a year's lead, take off in Europe before it took off here?
Oh, I think there's an excellent explanation to that. Is that the idea that the guys who built this had was to replace the larger machines with this little computational device. Europe wasn't ready for that, and Europe is really a fragmented market from a language barrier standpoint.
Now, was this evident to you at the time? I mean, is that why
Not
you
at
came
all.
here?
No.
Okay.
I really wasn't into business at the time. My interest, and I think it's always been like that. In some ways, it continues to be like that. My interest is in what technology can do to make life better. I mean, just in general. It's just that's really my interest. And I came here because I thought that that's where you could have the most impact.
Did you have a family at this point?
Yeah. I actually got married pretty young when I was 21. So at that point, I had 2 kids when I came to America. And today I have 4 kids. But I had 2 at the point.
That's a pretty bold move to pack it up, leave the family, and strike out, and you're going to see if you can make it in a strange country?
And the family came about 9 months later. Once I started, they stayed in France until I could afford to bring him over.
I mean, the story is, the legend has you had $5 grand in your pocket.
That's true.
And then, the first person you ran into offered to help you, ripped you off or something.
That always happens, but that's a minor detail. It makes you grow up.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always, Silicon Valley is full of people who want to charge you to help you.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you're down to $2 grand, and you're trying to start a company. How do you get from there to actually creating a firm and get some kind of legitimacy?
Well, I think we had a little bit of the discussion. Is that I started doing consulting. What I knew how to do. What I know how to do is taking an engineering problem and solving it. So I found my first customer actually was Adam Osborne, Osborne Computer. He had this new version of the Osborne that he wanted to ship for the Christmas of that year, and they were in a total disaster in terms of development. They were growing so fast. So I said, fine, I'll take it over, and I actually did do that, and it worked. I mean, they actually shipped the software, and I never got paid because they filed bankruptcy and all that.
Right.
But the word got out. What happens in Silicon Valley is you get people working in the engineering department. Even if the company fails, then they go somewhere else because they're smart people, and there's always a lack of talent there. And they knew the kind of work I did. And then the next company they went to, and I think they went to Apple or something, they called me up. They said, hey, you want that? And sure, I'll have it. And those guys paid their bills, and that's how I got started.
You also bluffed your way to your first ad, too, didn't you? There's a story about you in Byte magazine.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories that are about the early days of Borland that are correct, and some of them that are incorrect. Maybe this is not for you to set the record straight. That story about Byte is absolutely correct. It turns out that once we had a product to ship, we certainly didn't have an advertising budget, and we certainly didn't have venture capital. In fact, I didn't have time for that, just like I didn't have time for a green card. And I just called up the advertising guy from Byte and said, and got a lot of people to work in the office, and the phones to ring, and said, hey, it's this great thing, and we're going to advertise it in every magazine but yours.
Was this Turbo Pascal?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
It was a thing that we call Turbo Pascal, and so we're going to advertise it in any magazine but yours, and so give us some credit. And after a lot of discussion, I think he was impressed with what you saw. He gave us 90 days credit, and of course, when the ad ran, we got a lot of sales, and not only did we pay, but we became one of their best customers. So he was happy, and we were happy.
Now, how many orders did you get on that first ad? It was some phenomenal number.
We got a lot of orders very quickly.
Like thousands.
Thousands and thousands. I mean, for the time, it was really very interesting. And the word got out. But what happened is that the ad launched the product, but there's a funny anecdote that is also absolutely correct, is that this was a time of Comdex show in the fall of '83 when the first Borland product came out. And I went there, and I knew it was a good tool because it was a tool, and we were using it to build stuff. And everybody thought, wow, this really sets a new standard for tools to develop stuff. And these were the early days of the IBM PC, and in the early days of any platform, tools is a big business. And so I got there, and I got there a day earlier, and I cornered Shelley Adelson, who was the guy who started Comdex, now owns the Venetian Casino in Vegas. It sold it to Ziff Davis, right? His Comdex business. And I cornered him. I said, the same trick as with Byte. I said, listen, give me some credit. you know, 90 days or so that I can have a room to hold a press conference to demo this thing and give a, you know, give a demo to people and stuff like that. And, you know, I don't know if you know Shelley, but he says, oh, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, why would I do that? And, you know, after 15 minutes, he just gets fed up with me. I was pretty much a pain in the butt for him. So he really gets fed up. He says, hey, you know, you like it, why don't you go do it at McDonald's? And I said, you know what? That's not a bad idea. So I held my first press conference in '83, and I think at McDonald's on the Strip, you know.
Yeah.
And I invited people, and 20 people showed up. So, you know, that was Shelley's contribution to the founding of the company. So the press conference was great because it cost, you know, a pack of fries to everyone. And
yeah, well, I remember that. What I remember was that you were getting this reputation as being like the character in software, that that no one was quite sure what you were going to do next. I mean, was this intentional?
Absolutely not. I mean, I had no idea what I was going to do next. I mean, you know, it was not a reputation. It's like you build something.
Well, did you plan on building a corporation? I mean,
absolutely not.
Now, over the last 15 years, I've sat with the founders of a number of companies just at the moment when they're being assaulted by Microsoft. And it becomes, this isn't like competition. This is sort of like this juggernaut is bearing down on you, and you're tied to the railroad tracks, and you can see this thing coming, and you can't really think about anything else. Even at 4 a.m., you can't think about anything else but this thing coming at you. Was it like that for you?
It was, the tough years were around 1992, 1993, when really I realized that Microsoft was all out to get Borland, and there was no way to preserve Borland's core business in growth, because basically Microsoft was willing to give away to gain that share what Borland was selling. So you get to a point where you
can't compete with free.
It's just what happened to Netscape, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to compete with what's free. How much better do you need to be? And we're always better to be able to sell against that. But what happened in 1983 is I finally woke up, and I woke up to something that I said, you know, we have to change the playing field. And that was, you know, when everybody was starting to talk about the internet in 1993, if you remember.
Right.
And I went to the board and I said, you know, what we have here is not going to matter. Is really not going to matter. We need to change our business model. We cannot be a tools company. We need to be an internet company. We need to bet on this new platform that's coming out and that needs to happen. And we need to bet on things that are not PCs, because Microsoft is dominating that. Game over. I mean, they won the war. And so we had a big board meeting there. And they were arguing that, well, you know, the government will never let them do that, and, you know, they'll get sued for antitrust and all that. And my point was, it won't matter. It won't help you. By the time anything happens, if it happens, it won't matter. Yeah. Just, we got to rethink this, and because the PC platform as such is now dominated by Microsoft. And as long as we'll be there, we can't, I mean, it's very difficult to be there.
Did it ever get personal between you and Gates?
I never had any personal problems.
I mean, with Netscape, we certainly see that, and with Sun, we see that, and obviously with Oracle, we see that Ellison has this huge, almost obsession with Bill Gates. Did you ever get to that point?
No, I mean, for me, it was never about people.
Yeah.
For me, it's always about, you know, technology, what you build, and all that. So, you know, I'm indifferent to that.
Okay.
I mean, you have to ask Gates if he has a problem.
So, but you built this huge edifice, and now it's under enormous threat, and it may not survive.
So back to this board meeting.
Yeah.
I think it's a very crucial board meeting, and I you know, my plan was to go for this new space, which was the internet, and this device space, and all this stuff. And the decision at the board meeting is they wouldn't do it. So I put it on the table and says, well, guys, if that's the case, you know, I don't think I should be the one continuing to run this company. You guys should fire me, because I don't want to keep on doing that. And they did fire me.
It seems to me, as an outside observer, there's nothing as exciting as having your own company and having it taking off and being successful and being engaged and all this. But there's also nothing more horrifying than when it starts to come apart and it starts slipping away from your grasp, and forces beyond your control are tearing your edifice, your creation apart. What did that feel like? I mean, do you still remember it vividly?
Well, there is a side where it's really tough, but in my case, I think I was fortunate enough that it was tied to my focusing on something really new, a new market, something that was really there, but that my old company didn't want to do anymore. They just didn't want to do that. And so it was a double thing. On one side, it was, well, success is the best form of revenge, you know, watch this, kind of, rather than, you know, oh my God, I've lost all that. It was more like, well, you know, hey, I'm right, they're wrong, and I'm going to prove them wrong. And actually, that's exactly what happened. 5 CEOs later, they're still struggling, and the company's still around, and it's a multi-$100-million company. So I'm pretty proud.
Right?
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of that built something that lasted that long and for so many CEOs and stuff. But the reality of the matter is that I think it's an entrepreneur thing. Success is the best form of revenge. People will always say you're not going to make it, and when you're successful, it's great. And when you're successful, all the team that's working with you is also successful. So the technology becomes successful, the vision becomes successful, and everybody gets financially successful. So it all works again. It's kind of everything or nothing.
But what about that interval where you open the paper? You open the paper every day for years, and it's genius, 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 success, success, success. Then all of a sudden one day it's failure, 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 screw up, screw up, screw up, failure, failure, failure.
The first articles were kind of a shock to me because I didn't understand how all that worked. And then I realized that what goes up goes down, and that I should not have believed what was said when people said I was a genius. And I also shouldn't believe this. The reality is somewhere in between. And that if I focus on that, it would be negative and destructive. And what I need to focus on is the next thing.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I mean, the early years of Borland, you seem to be improvising as you go along.
But that's my jazz background.
Is it jazz and also living independently for so long?
Yeah, but jazz is great because jazz, you take a song and you always never play twice the same thing, and I think that helped a lot. That culture is really one where and you have to invent the future, okay? If you don't want to be a victim of the future, right? You just invent it. It's much better. So you just do that, and it worked.
You have 4 kids. What if one of them came to you and said, Dad, I want to be an entrepreneur just like you?
Well, to just do it, but I have a 25-year-old who's in med school and 23-year-old who wants to go to med school, a 10-year-old and a 2-year-old in diapers, so I've got them all the way from university.
Yeah, so you haven't slept in a quarter century, so you're too tired to give them advice.
Well, they're really nice to me. They sleep.
Oh, good.
They've always been good.
So you just tell them to do it?
Absolutely.
Risk it all, like you did?
Well, I think, what's the risk, really? I mean, if you think about it, if you're a healthy person and if you've got a skill, I mean, what I tell my kids is, and maybe I was kind of flippant when I said, just do it. My advice to my kids was always, get a technology education that gives you an engineering skill or a skill that you can market. And, be an engineer, which is what my family has always done, or, be maybe a doctor, and that's about all that's acceptable, kind of. And maybe an artist if you're really talented, but, that's really hard.
Wow, they listen.
I'm not sure they listen, but maybe you repeat it enough, they kind of do that. And once you have that, what's the risk? So you bet everything. So what's going to happen? You've got a skill. You can always get a job as an engineer. That's how I always felt. I mean, even in the Borland, they say, hey, if this doesn't work out, big deal. I started as an engineer. I'm still that.
So were you born an entrepreneur? Looking back, was it always in you, and it was just waiting to manifest itself, or is it something that you just sort of you acquired through experience? This collection of skills that made you that? I
don't know what an entrepreneur is, but to me, it's kind of it's a difference between kind of a jazz musician and a classical musician. I think a classical musician is the kind of guy who's going to work for a big company. A jazz musician is going to work in a small band and know how to improvise. And I think that's really to use an analogy, that's really the difference. And I think maybe that's kind of the connection to me, is that being an entrepreneur is liking the excitement of creating new things. Something new that's never been done before. That's really what it's about. To me, it was never about making money. For me, that was always a byproduct of being successful. But success started by doing something exciting.
And the improvisation, the solo, is the making it up as you go along.
Well,
constructing your own reality.
Well, the bottom line is, if you're really innovating, if you're really creating new things that nobody's done before, if you're not copying plagiarism, if you're not doing plagiarism, then what happens is that you have to create new because no one's done it before. I see what Starfish was doing and is still doing. I mean, there's new things, these clip-ons and all these things that Starfish is doing. LightSurf is going to build something really completely new. There's nowhere to look to see how to do it, and sometimes even the business models are new. And you have to be ready to invent the future, because if you don't invent the future, then you're going to live in somebody else's future.